W210 turns 20 years old. So the W210 first came out in 96 and went all the way up to 2002 for the sedans and 03 for the wagons. So it being 2022, this 2002 E430 is now 20 years old, and I've owned it for the last 8 years. So I just want to make a video going over my ownership experience with this car. So I got this car on January 31st, 2014. This car is now the same age as my W124 was when I first got it, also in 2014. And when I got this car in 2014, it just felt super old and super ancient. I want to go over how this car feels like we're at the same age. So I got this car January 31st, 2014 when it was about 12 years old. So this is a 2002, produced October 2001. And I believe, based on the records, this car was first registered in January 2002. So this thing's been on the road for 20 years. So from about January 2014 until about November 2017, this car was my everyday car. I drove it every single day, put 10 to 15,000 miles a year on it, and I'll go over everything I need to do to keep it running. So the car, as you see today, was not always as nice as it is. So a lot of stuff I did was just cosmetic, just to make things a little bit nicer. Not everything I did was completely necessary, but I did want the car to look and drive as best as it could. So I do want to say that this car has actually never left me stranded, has never needed a tow truck. There's only one time that this car has ever kind of left me stranded, and it wasn't even this car's fault. The second owner of this car decided to put a laser jammer in it, and he lost the remote. So when I got it, I had no idea that it had a laser jammer on it, and it was just always on. It would drain the battery. So one time the battery did drain, but I had someone jump me and we were fine. But other than that, this car is always turned on and always got me to where I need to be. So when I first got this car, it came on some 20-inch wheels, which they did look cool, but they just didn't fit right. They rubbed the front fenders, and the previous owner included some stock E320 wheels, and I put them on and I rode with that for quite a while. So that was like the very first thing I did. Of course, next up was fluids. I did the engine oil, the transmission fluid, and the diff fluid, and the coolant. And then I did spark plugs. And that was the first round of maintenance, and that really wasn't that much, and it's pretty easy and it's pretty cheap. So I got a set of 18-inch AMG Aero 3 wheels off of SL, and they did fit really nice. They look nice. That's not necessarily a necessity, but you know, with that comes new tires. So that got me probably another 1 or 2 years on the car. So we're looking at about late 2015, early 2016 now. And that's when I had to do the front suspension. So the main thing that started going out was the tie rods. So tie rods would shake. You had a 55-mile-an-hour vibration, and it was really annoying, and the car never shook before. So I went ahead and bought a, unfortunately, cheap aftermarket front end kit. So that included the lower ball joints, upper arms, tie rods, all the associating hardware like the sway bar bushings. And unfortunately, the lower control arm bushings on these cars are such a pain to do. It's just better off replacing the whole arm. So I had the whole arm replaced. And I did not have the ability to do that at the time by myself, so I had to shop do it. And while they were doing that, they did the valve cover gaskets as well. Now, in terms of the car running and driving, this is probably all it really needed until probably 2017 when the motor mounts went out. So when I did the front suspension, I did the motor mounts at that time. It was aftermarket kit. It wasn't that good, but they lasted until 2017. So in 2017, I had the motor mounts done again, and we were good, smooth sailing from there. And that is when the car retired from daily driving in late 2017. I should also mention that when I did the first oil change, I did also do the engine air filter and the cabin air filters. And I've done the oil changes on this car about every 5,000 miles on the dot. Like, that was just pretty much the religious maintenance I always did. And I got this car with about 140,000 miles. And in 2017, when I stopped driving it, it had about 185. So that was kind of a lot of oil changes, but I mean, I've never had any issues with the engine ever. Another thing I want to mention is tires. So everyone's experience will be different. I just want to say that when I got my Aero 3s, which are not these wheels, that it came with some cheap tires, some Nankang, just whatever they were. They were like $400 for a set of tires, which if you know 18-inch wheels, that's cheap. So they were fine for a while, but they would shake a lot. And I had a pretty severe vibration issue with this car. I was just chasing everything and couldn't figure it out, but it was tires. So one thing I want to say is buy nice tires. It's well worth the money. Be responsible. Don't just burn them up, and your car will drive very good. So sometime in late 2015, when I had my AMG Aero 3s, not these wheels, the brake pads went out. So at the time I did new pads and new rotors, and that actually lasted me a year. It was a solid year of driving. I drove this car a lot, and I drove this car really hard. So a year later, the front pads were due again, and I went ahead and replaced them. But as I'll tell you later, I did do the brakes again not too long after that because I decided to upgrade them. And another thing too, so this car, once I had the front end rebuilt, I had it aligned, and the alignment was good until whenever I decided to take the front end apart again. So I had this car on stock springs until 2017 when I put on coilovers, and now we're kind of getting into the stuff that is not necessary to do. This was fun stuff, cool stuff, cosmetic stuff. There are two types of owners. Some people just want the car to run and drive as good as possible, and they kind of do the bare minimum to keep it there. And then people that really just want a really nice car that's as close to new as possible, that you enhance it as much as you can. Well, I would say there's two types of people like that too. People that just go over the top and do everything, and people that keep it OEM plus, they call it. And I feel like I'm more in the OEM plus type crowd. So I'll go over what I did to modify this car. And that brought us up to date on most of the maintenance. So this car is a 2002 E430. Contrary to popular belief, this is still just an E430. So up until this point, I really hadn't done too much to the car. I added LED inner city lights right there, which they did burn out quite a few times just because they were cheap. And I decided because I was having issues with my taillights, and I'll tell you what that was. So every W210 has this problem. If we go in here and we open this compartment, we'll see the taillight, and you see these little plastic solders. Those wear out over time, and they loosen this circuit board, and these bulbs will no longer make contact with the taillight. So when that happens, one of your taillights won't work, either this one or that one. So I had that issue. I could have fixed it by plastic welding it, but I thought LEDs were cool at the time, so I got a pair of LEDs and I ran with it for quite a while. And believe it or not, the LED had a resistor on it which burned out, so I still kept getting the bulb out indicator, and I went back to these traditional halogen lights. These, you'll notice, are actually pretty nice. These are new, so I ended up buying probably a one-use set, ran with that for a while, and I bought a new set. So that's just something, like, if you want your car to be nice, sometimes you just have to buy new stuff. So that was not completely necessary. So car was driving great, it looked pretty good, and we were doing about 10 to 15,000 miles a year. So in about December of 2015, I decided I wanted to hear this car better. So it has a V8 in it, it's M113 V8, sounds great, but stock, they're super quiet, which is nice. Like, this is a nice, comfortable car, but I want to be able to hear the V8. So this car came with the AMG Sport Package. So I got the front bumper with the xenon lights, side skirts, and the Sport Package rear bumper. So the difference is, on the Sport Pack, you see this little fold right there for the exhaust. That does not exist on the Sport bumper, so it's just completely filled out, like it's just deleted. So I found a E55 AMG rear bumper, which is this one on the car, that has this cutout. And I went ahead and bought it. It was cheap. I think it was like 200 bucks. And it was black. The paint wasn't super nice, but at the time this car's paint wasn't that nice. So I got it, and I immediately got a muffler delete. So kept everything stock except just cut off the rear muffler. And we'll see that's no longer the case, but you've probably seen some of my videos with the sound demonstrated. It did sound nice, and I could live with it because I didn't really drive too much on the highway at the time. But yeah, it did drone, and eventually I did end up taking that off. So in 2017, I was finally able to get this car a garage space. Now that I was keeping it inside a garage, I didn't want the car as loud. I got a AMG rear muffler. I had it gutted, and I removed the secondary cats and the resonator and put the muffler on, and that quieted down the sound quite a bit. It still sounded good when you were on it, but overall it wasn't annoying, and it didn't drone, which is important for me at the time. because as a daily driver, this car actually spent quite a bit of time on the highway, and it did drone a lot with that muffler delete. So with the AMG muffler, no drone, it's basically stock on the highway. Very happy with it, and that is what I still have today. And in 2017, that's when I started doing most of the work. Late 2016, early 2017, I did manage to secure a set of front and rear W210 E55 AMG calipers. And that is what I'm still running today. So at the time, I did the front and rear calipers, custom drilled and slotted rotors. And they don't actually make these for the E55 because they are floating. And it's actually not better. Don't do this. I just did it because it looked cool. Stainless steel lines, ceramic brake pads, and that has been the only thing I've been running this car since. And completely unnecessary because I had previously already done the pads and rotors before. So in terms of stuff that like it actually needed to run on the road, I would say just need the brakes. I'm not going to count tires because that depends on everybody, but you could count at least one set of tires in there. Spark plugs is maintenance, and all the fluids and a couple oil changes. Spark plugs, air filter, like it was just really basic stuff. This car was extremely reliable. It didn't need almost any maintenance. Like it was crazy. I was just putting gas in this thing for the longest time. And it was a really great car to drive. So the next thing I did on this car in terms of enhancements, which was completely unnecessary, and I just did it because it was cool, was this AMG Airbox. So what are the benefits of this? Pretty much the stock Airbox on both 430 and 320 have a tiny box right here with just one air inlet right here. So this gets you dual air inlets, and that is the only benefit. It is mostly just cosmetics. I mean, I guess having technically double the amount of air coming in is something, but I mean, I did kind of feel a little bit of a difference. It wasn't a huge difference, but it just looks cool. And does confuse a lot of people about what this car is. It is still an E430, that's a stock engine in there. So by doing the Airbox, it may have triggered some other preventive maintenance that was good to do, which I probably would not have done if I had not done this Airbox. So the first thing I had to do, replace the radiator, because the radiator is different. On the 430 radiator, it's actually exactly the same, except this hose, instead of connecting at the bottom there, it connects up here where this air inlet is. So that's the only difference between the 430 and the 55 radiator. So I had to do that, and then we had to do this brake booster vacuum hose, and we had to change out this fuel line right here. And believe it or not, this fuel line was no longer available from Mercedes-Benz at the time. So that is another thing I'll talk about later. And then another thing I had to do, which might be hard to see, but you see that purple wire? We had to extend the wiring to the mass airflow sensor connector. And otherwise, besides that, it fit. And this front cover almost fit. We had to trim right around there because on the US E430s, this engine oil filter housing is a little bit closer to the left side because there's no engine oil cooler here. So in order to retrofit the engine oil cooler, you have to take the front timing cover off and change it. And I didn't want to do that at the time, so this is what I did instead. So other than that, I had to get this hose right here, and it's this little T connector, and this thing does fail over time, so I'm sure I'll have to replace that eventually. And that was about it. Well, actually it was two. So this thing right here connects here permanently, and then you have this joint right here which comes with these two lines. So that is what I had to get to change the Airbox. Once again, not necessary, but I wanted to do it because it was cool. Also, I forgot to mention, in order to actually close your hood, there is this piece right here, which I do have. I've taken off just to attach it better, but you do need to change that too. But those are everything you need to do in order to fit this Airbox into a non-AMG car. And actually, believe it or not, this Airbox will fit on a M112, so the V6 version of this. I don't think it will snap down here, but it will actually sit down like this. And I don't even think you need to trim this because it'll be pushed further back, but it will fit. All right, so now we're in early 2017 and I've got the Airbox, the brakes, and the exhaust. So now I want to fix the ride height on this car. There's nothing wrong with it. It was the US ride height, but this car does look really good low. And I put, as you can see, the PB coilovers on here. And I did do an install video on that, so check that out if you are interested. But the car sat really nice, it was really low. My friends helped me install it and it looked great and it functioned great. But you know, after a while, and this is before I got the car painted, it was low. So a car with 3-wheel, it would scrape the center exhaust, and it's just, you have to be really careful. But the capabilities of this car lowered, especially on coilovers, improves greatly. So canyons, this thing was amazing. So I kept the coilovers on even after paint, and I kept the ride height for almost 2 years. So I rode low for 2 years and it was quite the experience and I enjoyed it. But that leads us to the next part. I got this car painted. Paint on these cars, if you have original paint, don't do it. It's unnecessary. Do not paint your whole car. So if you can verify that your 210 has original paint, the only things that will ever need to be painted due to age and mileage will be the entire front end, fenders, hood, bumper, possibly these mirrors, this trim that goes all the way back on the roof, and you'll see mine, the clips are broken, and the top parts of the rear bumper and the front bumper, and very rarely the trunk will fade as well. But besides that, the original paint on these cars, they last quite a while, they look good. So why did I get my car painted? Well, unfortunately, the second owner decided to paint the whole car. He got a really cheap paint job, and the paint was literally cracking and flaking away, starting from the front to the back. The front was the worst part of the whole car. I'll try to insert some pictures, but I just had to do it because, well, it looked terrible. Like, you could literally come to the hood, grab a chunk of paint, just take it right off. And I decided at that point, like, I was going to keep the car, so it just made sense to do it. That is officially when the car became retired. So I got the car painted around, well, I dropped it off earlier, but it was completed around August of 2017. I went up to Monterey Car Week, had a great time, came back, drove it just a little bit, and in November, I got another daily driver, and this car officially retired from daily duty. But up until that point, I mean, I did a lot of unnecessary stuff, obviously, but I mean, the car was so reliable. It was such a joy to drive. And these days, I do miss daily driving this car. This car is so much fun. I'll mention with the paint, I did get the headlights clear coated, and I did a video about that too. So this is how you get your headlights to stay looking nice. But up until then, I had restored them probably about 3 or 4 times, just sanding and buffing it, which works, but you know, it fades over time. So that is something you should consider doing, is clear coating your headlights if you own this car and you want it nice for a longer term. And then obviously with paint, I decided to do some customization. I got the grille color matched, the side markers color matched. I did the wheels at a later date. They are color matched too. Got all the trim color matched. And that is, well, very close to pre-merger AMG spec, which this car is obviously not pre-merger, but I just thought it looked cool. So if your car does require paint and it does have mostly original paint on it, I would suggest whatever is original, especially if it's like the frame, like the main body panels, keep them original. I would just get the front end painted, rear bumper, side skirts, and whatever else, little plastics that could come off. Otherwise, I would recommend keeping the paint as original as possible, unless you're stripping the entire car and painting it. But that's something I wish this car didn't need, because the original paint on these cars, they still look good if they're taken care of. All right, so now here we are at August 2017. I got the car back for paint. It looks better than it ever has before. And this is the first time ever in my ownership that the check engine light came on. Right after paint, I was super bummed out. And it was kind of strange. When I picked the car up from paint, the battery was dead, which was kind of normal because they had everything apart, so the lights never turned off. So I got another battery and everything was fine. But then on the way to Monterey, the almost 1,000 miles, right as we start our journey, check engine light comes on, does not go off. This is the first time I ever had a light on this car, and I couldn't believe it. It was just the EGR code P0400, and I didn't know anything about it at the time, so that's when I began learning. And turns out they're just vacuum lines for the most part. It's not the actual EGR valve. So I get lucky, I replace one line when we come back, and that one line solves my light, and I'm good for however long. Now, it was not too long because the light came back. So, and this was another thing, like I replaced one line that was visibly damaged. It came off for a while, then it came back on. And by the end of it, I ended up redoing all the lines. And for the most part, that was it. All the lines were new, so no more light. Continued driving it, not doing a whole lot to the car, just keeping it clean, making it nicer. So I decided to detail the engine bay, used degreaser and pressure washer, and it was fine. But fast forward, and we get the P0400 again. and I thought it was a line. Traced all the lines, they're all good. Made no sense. This car had extremely terrible idle sometimes. Like if I come to a stop, like just braking, the car would start misfiring almost and then die. And we diagnosed that as a clogged EGR tube. So we pulled the tube out and the tube was completely clogged. You could not even blow air through it. So we went ahead and cleaned it up, put it back in the car, and we were good to go. And that is something I want to mention. So there are generally two types of items that will need to be replaced on cars. Ones that come with the use of mileage, so more miles the car has, just some things wear out and they need to be replaced, and some things with age, and some things with both. But this car is now at that age. It's 20 years old, where a lot of stuff, just rubber, just is dry rotted. It needs to be changed out, and that is what the future of this car looks to be holding. So when I got this car, it was 20 years old, and it was fine at the time, but you know, like the next 5 years, that's when I really started to see age becoming a factor in terms of items starting to disintegrate. That is what the future of this car kind of holds right now. I want to talk about that a little bit. The M113, as far as I'm concerned, it is bulletproof with mileage, just, you know, routine maintenance. But however, as these motors are getting older, there are more and more reports of oil and coolant mixing in all these motors, 112, 113. What that is not a head gasket. Everyone thinks it's a head gasket. M104s need head gaskets. 113s do not, 112s do not. What is that issue? There are two O-rings in the front timing cover that go bad, that seal the oil and coolant passages. So they swell up over time, they get dislodged, and that causes the oil and coolant to mix internally. It's not the oil cooler for the cars that have the oil cooler. It's not the radiator, although sometimes the radiator does go bad. It is those two O-rings, and that doesn't sound like a bad job, right? But in order to get to that timing cover, you have to either remove the heads, which really sucks, or you got to remove the upper and lower oil pans. So that is something that might come in the future for these cars. Right now, just if you do Google search, it's pretty inconsistent. Like some of the initially like earlier cars, like 98s, they're the ones that usually have higher reporting ratings of these types of issues, but those cars are older. What about these newer cars? Like this is 02, so this is what, 4 or 5 years newer. And what about the even newer cars now that go up to 05, 06? So the future is still uncertain at this time for these cars, but like I said, there are more and more reports of oil and coolant mixing, and that is something I'm kind of going to look out for. Hopefully it doesn't happen, knock on wood. But that does seem to be the Achilles heel of this M113 right now. Otherwise, like literally, like the weakest part about this engine is the valve cover gaskets. They leak pretty frequently, even when you use factory parts. But I mean, that's such a minor thing, like it doesn't even count. M104 needs a whole head gasket, timing cover, everything. Like it's just, this is a high maintenance motor, I would say. This one is not. And again, another thing I want to mention is too, like some people might not mind a minor oil leak, so the valve covers are not a big deal. I mean, I've had the valve cover leak on this car for the past few years, and I'm just now getting around to planning on fixing it. But I mean, it's just so minor. Like it drops on the exhaust manifold while the car warms up, so it steams just a little bit, but it's really such a minor thing. Other than that, like I would replace the spark plugs every 50,000, oil change every 5,000 or 6 months, whatever comes first. And like this engine has had no issues. Same thing with the transmission. Hopefully you buy a car that has had frequent transmission oil changes. If it has not, well, I'm sorry, you're probably gonna need transmission, but I've changed oil on this transmission frequently and it's been zero issues, super smooth front and back. And I'm really happy with the 5-speed transmission in this car. It is way quicker than the older 4 speeds. It's way more reliable in my opinion. I just really like it. It's not the fastest thing in the world, but it is actually surprisingly responsive. Compared to modern stuff, it is dated, but it's still, in my opinion, a lot more modern feeling than a 124. So one common issue that I did attempt to fix myself, and this is back when I first got the car in 2014. This was probably a month or two after I got it. The headliner sagged like insane. So I decided I would attempt to fix it myself. So I pulled it back inside the car. I did pretty much almost no disassembly, just pulled the light out, unclipped the headliner and let it hang down. And I pulled the headliner back, cleaned out as much of the foam as I could. This is held in by foam, that's why it sags. And then I got some 3M headliner adhesive. I sprayed it and held it down by hand for a couple minutes, and this is the result. So unfortunately, that adhesive and the foam, it's just really dirty. Like, there's no way around it. You have to do this outside of the car to do a good job, but that's what I did, and it stained it, so it's been looking ugly for the last 8 years. So I'm just now getting around to doing this. So if you want to watch that video, please subscribe, and I will hopefully get that done sometime this year. But I do have a spare headliner getting reupholstered right now, so that is one of the next things to do inside this car. Another thing to mention is you probably noticed that the seats are not from an E430, and that is because I swapped out most of the interior with a ruby red. They call this AMG Condor leather. So this is the seats I always wanted. Found a set in decent shape, and I decided to put it in the car. So this is completely unnecessary, and I just wanted to do it because, well, red's like my favorite interior color. And here we have it, steering wheel and all. It's all here. I didn't do the wood, kept the stock 430 wood. And if we look, so this car came from the factory with the sunshade, command navigation, heated seats, xenon, the language control right there, which no longer works, unfortunately, but this is all factory options. So the only thing that was not available on this car that the 55 had was the vacuum lumbar support control on the seats. So fortunately, from a parts car, I was able to get the lines and the reservoir, and the pump is the same, so I just have to enable the star, but that is an option I can add to this car. I swapped out the armrest. This armrest always bubbles on the, this is stitched leather, so my car had the vinyl, so that started to bubble, so I changed that out. And then in terms of wood, this wood is original to this car. I have not changed the wood, and we'll see. This is the weakest part right here. A couple cracks, not terrible. This part's the most faded, and then there's one crack on that wood in the center, but otherwise pretty good shape. A lot of people, and I'm not trying to call anyone out here, but a lot of people get fixated on wood, and I just don't get it. Like, their cars are not running right, they got other issues, but they'll go ahead and spend thousands of dollars redoing their wood, and that adds pretty much nothing to the car. I don't understand. That is not something I'm going to do anytime soon. The wood does not bother me one bit. But I mean, once this car gets more and more complete, I will eventually decide to do something with the wood, whether it be redoing it, replacing it, or whatever. But just something that, there are different types of owners out there, just, you know, I mentioned it before. And I would prefer to have a car that drives better than looks better, and then work on looks. But you know, some people work in different orders. And we'll probably notice I swapped out the cluster. Yep, that is a 210 AMG cluster. If you want a shortcut hack, if you want to do that, buy the cluster, take yours apart, swap the faces. Not too hard to do. I didn't do that. I took the hard way. I put the cluster in. I had to pay to program it to my car, and now it functions properly, shows the correct mileage and all that. So that is, if you want to do that, that's how you do that. Change out the steering wheel and the airbag as well, AMG spec. And yeah, there's a lot of just AMG stuff on this car. I don't know. I probably should have just bought an E55. I got carried away, I guess. But I really want one with this interior. And I just, at the time when I was ready to buy, there was none out there. So I decided to just keep my car. And somehow I came across this, you know, seats are covered up, but I came across this interior and I just had to have it. So here we are today. And yeah, the interior looks pretty terrible right now. No A-pillars, those are getting recovered. No dome light. That's an ML mirror, that's wrong. So the reason why this headliner fails on every single 210, if it hasn't failed yet, it will eventually. And you can kind of see, so when we touch it, you see it leaves an imprint. So this is fiberglass, and they foam it, they foam this, whatever material this is, this fabric, onto the fiberglass. So foam is soft, so when you touch foam, it indents. So this indent, like you'll see, it's there. It'll stay there for a little bit, but it'll eventually work itself out. But every time you touch this foam, it weakens it. So headliners that sag usually have been touched a little bit, but the biggest factor is heat. More heat cycles, the more it just weakens it. So this car had seen quite a bit of sun, and unfortunately the headliner was a victim to that. So that is what happened. And we'll see here, before I removed the front door handles and the front visors, they were actually sticking pretty well. Like, I could bring the visor down and it wasn't sagging. I could bring the handle down and it didn't sag. But you know, as soon as I took those off, like literally like a day later, it just gave out. So it's a time, age, and heat cycle type thing. If you do want to redo this headliner correctly, you do have to refoam it, which sucks. It's a really difficult process, but if I were you, I would just get a new material glued on here, and I'm going to be doing black Alcantara. So that's what I decided to do to fix the headliner. So we will see that this car currently has 199,710 miles. So I got this car with about 140-ish. So we're almost at 60,000 miles of driving. And I would say probably about the first 45,000 miles, probably up until about 190, maybe 185, was about how long I daily drove this car. Quite a bit of seat time in here. So one of the very first unnecessary things I did to this car was swap the interior. So I really wanted a W210 E55 with the two-tone red and black interior. And when I was ready to buy, I actually had this car for sale, and I just couldn't find a car with that interior. It's just really hard to find. So I got lucky. I found the full interior on eBay for like $1,000 delivered, and it was in pretty good shape. So I went ahead and decided to buy it. That happened in around 2016. So we swapped everything in, and that is how I got the interior for this car. Once again, completely unnecessary. The black interior in there was fine. It was in good shape, but I just had to have the red, and that was like one of the very first things I did that really spiraled out of control to make this car what it is today. And you'll notice some of the stuff I did was kind of dumb. It was expensive, but you know, I like this car a lot. I don't think I'll ever sell it. So anything I do to this car is just, it's worth it. Whatever enhances the driving experience, the ownership experience, I do it if I like it. So like I said, different types of owners. Some people just want a car that runs and drives. Some other people want a car more tailored to their taste. So that is what's going on with my car. So around 2018, I believe we're in January, I decide I don't want to be low anymore, and I take the coilovers off. So what do? I decide to keep the shocks, which was a bad idea, but I put H&R springs on, which is great. I like the H&R springs. It's currently what it sits on. I think this is a good height for it. It's about what the Euro height is. The car's level, it's not raked, and that's just how I prefer it. Turns out at the time when we were doing the springs, we discovered that someone previously working on this car, and I know exactly when this happened. It wasn't me doing it, it was someone else. They had crushed the driver's side lower control arm. They actually crushed it, so the ball joint area was bent. So the front driver's side was like 2 inches lower than the front passenger side. I couldn't figure that out for the longest time until I put it up in the air again, checked, and that was a big issue. So swapped out the lower control arms yet again, this time not due to age or mileage, but damage. They were actually damaged, so that's something I had to do again. And at the time I did the springs in 2018, I did upper control arms, tie rods, and that was it. At the same time also, when I did the springs, I did another transmission service. So fluid, filter, gasket, did again, and it's fine, no leaks. Luckily the fluid was still very clean. At the time, I did not immediately replace the control arm. It was actually such a minor bend in 2018. So I just got another alignment, and it compensated for the bent control arm, and I drove it like that until December 2020. So from 2018 till December 2020, this car got driven probably about 3,000 to 4,000 miles a year. I didn't drive it a whole lot, but I still put some miles on it. And in that time, I just did oil changes. There's only one major maintenance that I needed, and that was, so when I turned the car on, when it was cold, there's a loud squealing sound coming from the front of the car. It needed a new tensioner, idler pulley, and belt, so we did all that, and that was like $150. It wasn't that much. So that was one thing that was impeding doom, because when I took the old pulleys off, they were about to give way. They were so far cracked, and the bearings were shot, so that was something that had to be done. And that was in about 2019. Fast forward to 2020, I get another check engine light. And this time it's for a similar code. I forgot what it was exactly, but it was for the purge valve, the evap purge valve, the one right on the driver's side of the engine bay. Super easy access, $80 part, swapped it out, no check engine light, car passes smog. It's fantastic. So I'm driving this car little by little, and the front driver's side just keeps getting lower and lower and lower. And eventually, when I make a full turn, I hear some rubbing, metal on metal rubbing, coming from the driver's side. I do some investigation, and that front arm is like bad. It's visibly bad. Like, it's not like you need to get close up on it. Like, you put the car in the air, you turn the wheel and you look inside, it's visibly bent. So at the time I decided, okay, let's do control arms. So swapped out the control arms, kept my springs, and that fixed my ride height issue. Car sat nice and even, very good. And unfortunately, we're putting back the suspension. It's really late at night, and I discover that the shocks don't fit with these regular springs. So when you get lowering springs, they're fairly tall, not super tall, but the coilover springs are just tiny compared to them. So the length of the shocks are for the coilover springs. So I had to put new shocks in this car. So I got us a Bilstein Sports, and it's been fine ever since, but that was just another set of shocks and springs I had to do. So put the new control arms in, get the new shocks in, get the car aligned. Drives amazing, really happy. New tires, I got these wheels refinished, put them on at the same time as the new control arms, and new Michelin Pilot Sport 4S, which is the only tire you should be running on this car if you live in a dry climate. This car finally drives the way it should be. One thing I forgot to mention in terms of suspension is I've replaced the sway bar bushings and the links one time, then I had to replace the links probably 2 more times afterwards. And then in terms of the rear suspension, I actually haven't done anything except the rear outer lower control arm bushing, the one that's on the hub on this side. And fortunately for me, this car being a 430, not producing as much torque as a 55, the rear suspension does last a little bit longer. A lot of 55s I felt with this kind of mileage, the rear end feels loose. That's because with the torque, that puts extra stress on the diff bushings and the subframe bushings and all the links. So this one being a bit lower torque, it just doesn't wear them quite as quickly. And fortunately for me, like, this car still feels really solid. And the way you can tell that is when you go over big bumps, the rear end will usually feel out of sync with the front. And fortunately, like for me, it rides really good still. And speaking of the sway bars, I did, after replacing the bushings and the links, I did decide to upgrade the sway bars to AMG spec ones. So I have an AMG E55 bar in the front and the rear. And when I did that, I got them off a parts car. And the parts car had the bushings replaced not too recently, but they weren't super old, so I decided to keep those bushings, did not change them out. I'm running the old bushings all around, and the front ones have finally started to let go, and they make a horrible creaking noise. But other than that, it does not affect the way the car drives. Those will need to be replaced in the near future. So in 2020, when I did that, I decided, okay, let's make this car a little bit nicer. I decided I want all white front lights, so I did LED inner city lights again. I got Philips Diamond Vision fog lights, which look white. And then I did LED interior lights. And unfortunately, I can't show you what the front looks like because there's no dome line in it right now. But it does include the whole kit for all this and the trunk. So if someone's interested, let me know and I'll make a full video on that. So this car is not very receptive to LED lights. So if you have a facelift car like this, like putting LED lights with those built-in canvas resistors generally doesn't work. And I really wanted LED reverse lights on this car, so I found a set of funky bulbs with external resistors. And I do some trimming, but they work, so I got LED reverse lights on this thing now. And here's what that looks like. Much brighter, actually illuminates the rear of this car much better at night. So speaking of light bulbs, there's only 2 light bulbs I've actually had to replace that have been burned out. One of them being the license plate lights, so when that happened, I decided let's do LEDs. So you see, I got some tinted LEDs in there. I tinted them myself just because they're a little bit too bright. And the only other light I've ever had to change is this passenger side xenon light. I had to change just that one side. And luckily I pulled it off another car with lower mileage. And I only have to change that one side and it matches perfectly. We'll see here, I got the LED there. And I got the Philips Diamond Vision. which is pretty close. Maybe a little bit too warm white in the video, but in person, it's a lot closer than it looks in the video. So in the future, I'd like to do LEDs on the fog lights, but that may not be possible just with how this car's canvas system works. That's all I had to do in terms of lights. So for as long as I had this car, the interior lights all worked, except for this light right here did not work when I got the car. So I swapped that out, fixed it, and I swapped out the LEDs. And now I got a nice bright trunk. Let's see, it's full of spare parts and a car cover. Wheels are not necessary to change, but I've changed wheels on this car 3 times so far. And these are the 3rd set of wheels I had on this car. So the very first set I put on was just the stock E320 wheels from the 20-inch wheels this car came on. Then I put the AMG Aero 3s, and I got those refinished later on. And then I decided, let me get the Aero 2s. Got those refinished, new tires, and here we are today. And while I'm filming this video, I'm in the process of refinishing a 4th set of wheels for this car, which is completely unnecessary. Makes no sense, but you know what? I found some wheels I really liked, and I think they'll look really good on this car, so I went ahead, pulled the trigger. But it's just stuff like that. Like, no, you don't really need to do that. And most people will be happy with just these or the previous wheels I ran, but like I said, I don't plan to sell this car anytime soon, so might as well enjoy it. Speaking of refinishing wheels, let's talk about that a little bit. So the first set of wheels I got, the Aero 3s, they were in actually pretty good shape. So I could just ran those. Most people will be happy with that. But I just want, I don't know, I just want very nice. So got those refinished, and then unfortunately not every refinisher is good. So the finish on that started flaking off. And I told myself I didn't want to refinish with the wheels again. So got another set of wheels. I really actually never liked these Aero 2s. I thought they looked too dated on a 210. Found a set for a decent price, had them refinished. And we put them on the car with new tires, new wheels, refinished, new tires, alignment, and here we are. So another unnecessary thing I did, I don't know if you can notice, but the windows are extremely dark, very hard to see in. So this car came with window tint that was installed at the dealer, I think in 2008. So 6 years after this car was new, put tint on it, and it held up okay. And when I got it, the rear windshield started to bubble. And it wasn't horrible, got worse over time, and I could live with the bubbles, but the rear windshield got super fuzzy and hazy. It was just very difficult to see out of. So I decided in 2021, I think, I got all the windows retinted, got them darker, ceramic tint. Please, like, if you get tint for this car, it's worth the extra money. Get the nicer tint. And the interior of the car is much cooler. I think the car looks a lot better. The car being black with dark tint, I think it fits really well. Luckily, when you remove the rear windshield tint, none of the froster lines got damaged. And speaking of quality tint, how do you tell if it's quality tint? Well, take a look here. There's no edges at all. 0 edges. So a lot of tint guys will leave a little bit of a gap, but if your guy knows what he's doing, no gap is better. Fortunately, I have not had to replace a window regulator yet, and let's hope that good fortune continues. I've only ever had to replace the windshield wiper blade once, and it's been good ever since. But I did drive this car today, so I did see some rain, but since 18, I don't think this car's seen any rain at all, which is probably going to be the way from now on. So that windshield wiper will probably almost never get changed out again. So when this car was getting painted, I did get the headlights clear coated. I also did get new fog lights, so that does look a lot nicer. And I had the front plate shaved off. So that pretty much wraps up my ownership with this car for the last 8 years. So at the time of this filming, it is January 26th. So on January 31st, which is a couple days away, it'll be a full 8 years. So that's what it's been like to own this car for 8 years. The operating costs, I would estimate, if you just want to keep the car running pretty good, I'll probably say about budget $1,000 a year, maybe. It's a very reliable car, it doesn't need a whole lot. I mean, doing all the extra stuff I did it depends on the car too. I mean, some cars need more than others. This car, luckily, it did kind of have a rough life, but looking back at the records, looks like the first owner who owned it for the first 10 or 11 years, he took it in for a dealer for everything. I think he worked there, he had the extended warranty, so this car got a lot of good care early on in its life. And fortunately, the second owner who did the most damage to this car, he only owned it for maybe couple years. I can't remember exactly, but I've owned it the second longest now. That is what I want to share. Just as these cars become more popular with age, more people want to own them. So that's just what the ownership experience kind of looks like. So I hope you found that information useful. If you did, I'd appreciate a thumbs up. And if you stuck around this long, well, I'm going to do this last part kind of just for future me. But let's talk about the future plans of this car. Currently, right now, we are getting the headliner redone and some wheels refinished for this. So once that's done, I want to do a little bit of maintenance. So all this car needs is do all the fluids one more time, engine transmounts, and that's pretty much it. This car just needs very minor stuff. I do have plans to do some more trim pieces like in the engine bay and the wheel wells, just, you know, make the car just as nice as it could be. But long term, I want to boost this car. I don't want to stay NA. I don't know if I'll ever be able to do that, but right now I'm just in the talking stages of learning how that's even possible. So I'm hoping one day we can achieve boosting this car. I'd love to document it for you guys, but I don't know if that day will ever come, but if it does, that'd be cool. And if that day does come, I do plan to put on bigger brakes yet again. And in fact, I already purchased one side, so I'm just missing the other side. I could theoretically do it now, but I'll wait for the boost. The engine has been super healthy, and I hope it continues to be healthy, but boosting it may require swapping it. There's also other methods of keeping the same engine, but I really don't know what the future entails, but that's just something I wanted to put out there for me. Hopefully I could reference this in 2 years when I've owned this car for 10 years and see where I'm at. So one of the best parts about owning this car, besides it looking so damn good, is how well it drives. So let's go take it out for a spin. And now I'm going to show you guys one of my dirty secrets here. Let's see if you can hear it. You hear that creaking? That's the sway bar bushings totally shot. Sounds terrible.